morning, everybody, and welcome to ConTinual. I'm Jeanne Adams, and today we are absolutely privileged to have an hour with Nalini Singh. Welcome, Nalini.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
So glad to have you. We have been doing a series here on ConTinual with authors to just talk about their body of work and how they got started and, just that sort of thing. And I met you first at RWA. Gosh, that's maybe San Francisco.
Yeah, a long time ago, yeah.
Been a while ago, but it's just a delight to have you here. And what was your start in writing? How did you decide to get into this crazy business?
So I'm a reader. I always have been a big reader, and honestly, I don't know what set me off into writing. I just decided that's what I wanted to do as well. I think it was a case of I couldn't quite find what I wanted to read, so I started sort of trying to put together stories. But I was very young when I started, so it's always been a part of my life, pretty much. So I remember I didn't have the vocabulary for what I wanted to say when I was, quite young. And I remember making my mum help me with this is what I want to say. And I just kept going. I wrote my first full-length novel as a teenager. It wasn't the greatest, but I finished it. Yeah. and just kept going. And at some point I figured out, how to submit to publishers, and I thought, of course, they're just going to love what I've written because, the confidence of youth. Yes. And and the funny thing is, so I'm based in New Zealand, but there's not really genre publishers in New Zealand. It's mostly literary fiction that publishers, is acquired in New Zealand, is published here. And also I'm old, so this is pre-self-publishing. So the only way for me to get published was to submit to an international publisher. So I figured it out. I figured out how to submit to someone overseas. And I think I was 18 when I did it the first time. I sort of used up all my pocket money, whatever I'd saved with part-time jobs or whatever, and because postage from New Zealand is enormous. So yeah, I submitted to London, and I got this. It's quite fast for rejection, actually. It was like a compliment slip size, not even like a full page. But I was like, I already had the bug. I was like, oh, they'll like my next thing, and off I went. So yeah, so I started that way, through the slush pile. I just kept submitting and submitting and submitting and submitting, yeah, until somebody had enough and picked me up.
So your first published book was Slave to Sensation, is that right? The Psy Changeling?
No. Okay. Slave to Sensation was my first paranormal. My first published book was Desert Warrior with Silhouette Desire. I wrote 6 contemporaries with Silhouette, and then I was actually always writing the paranormals, but so happened that I got published with the short contemporaries. And then, yeah, and I think, so I sold my first book in 2002, so that was Desert Warrior. And then in 2005, I sold Slave to Sensation. So it's not a huge gap in between, but it felt huge at the time because in category romance, most people were publishing, the friends I knew were publishing sort of like, say, 4 books a year at least. Right. And I couldn't even sell 2, I was having such difficulty. And I just thought, and I was working overseas, and I kind of had said, well, this is my chance to make it. And if I don't, when I go back, I have to go back to my real job, which at the time was law. And so it felt like this enormous time that's passing, and I'm just not getting anywhere. But so I basically just was like, I'm just going to write Slave to Sensation. It's in my head. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I'm just going to write it. And yeah, it went from there.
Well, and it from all I've been able to see took off and really became quite a thing that everybody really liked, and there was great demand for the next book and the next book. And there are 15 in that series. in the first initial, the Psy Changeling.
Yes. Yeah, so the Psy Changing series has the 15 books, and then there's the spin-off Psy Changeling Trinity. I will say that it didn't quite take off as it might seem now, because it's a successful series now. So when I started, I didn't hit any sort of big bestseller lists until book 4 of that series. So that hit it hit the New York Times, the extended list. But until that point, I hadn't, I wasn't hitting those major lists. And so I was starting to wonder, but I'm really grateful that I had a publisher that supported me. My editor, just was really supportive, and I loved the series. And so I had that time to build the series, and
right.
Yeah, I'm so happy it's still going along, in its second iteration.
Absolutely. It's interesting because for anyone who's viewing, who's new to the publishing industry, before the advent of self-publishing, you did have to mail like your query letters and your entire manuscript, which was quite expensive, even within the States. I can't imagine what it was like from outside the country. And, paranormal romances were not a big deal at that point. It was really just starting into a little bit of the vampires, not a lot of, anything but that. And so Slave to Sensation was kind of a new kind of cross between science fiction and fantasy. We really saw that a lot in science fiction and fantasy with the world building that you did in this world. That's a more science fiction fantasy sort of a world than a traditional romance world. And so I'm sure that, like many of my friends who love the series, we crossed over from the fantasy side of things, loving that, to, also loving romance. Well, gosh, here we have a series that has both. So that's so wonderful for anybody who's looking. This is the cover to Slave to Sensation. And this one is just fabulous. It hooked me right in. And then it goes into the Trinity series, and those are in hardcover. So your publisher certainly believed in those.
No, it's I went into hardcover at book 10 in the Psy Changing series. So the last 5 books of the Psy Changing series came out in hardcover originals. And so that was a big change for me, and a big shift. And I'm just really happy that readers, have supported the series so strongly. I love getting emails from readers who have either just found the series and have, I had someone email me and said, I just spent the past month reading the entire first season and the second season. So that's like 18 books. And now I'm bereft because now I don't have the next one. So that's great. And I also love hearing from readers who have been with me from the start, and I've had to wait for every book to come out, and I'm still here, and I'm still in love with this series. And that I've always been really grateful that I found my readership, and for their support, because there are so many writers out there who are writing really wonderful stuff, but they haven't found their audience, and that can make such a difference in whether they get to continue to tell the story they want to tell. So I do feel, it's that mix of working hard and getting the material out there, but it's also a little bit of luck and a little bit of fairy dust, because it's like finding the right people who love the work, and want to come on the journey with me.
Yes. You created a completely different world starting in 2009 with the Guild Hunter series, which starts with Angel's Blood, and that just has a recent release in that series. November 24th, I think, the Archangel's Son came out.
Yes.
And there are now 13 books in that series. Am I?
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
Yes.
So what made you, obviously you've been writing the silhouettes, you've shifted into writing the Psy Changelings, and suddenly Raphael appears on the scene. How did that, what was the genesis of Angel's Blood?
Okay, so I came out of writing from science fiction and fantasy and romance, which kind of explains, you know, what I write.
Yes.
But so I've always loved making worlds and creating kind of what if questions, you know, like what if you had great psychic abilities? What if they drove you insane? What would you do to survive? And that's the genesis of the Side Changing series. So with the Guild Hunter series, I was writing at the time, I was writing 2 Side Changing books a year. And I was no longer writing any of the category contemporary romances. Mm-hmm. And I had gone full time as a writer, or I was on the verge of going full time. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly I had a lot more time than I was used to having for my writing, because prior to that I was either studying at school or at university, or I was working quite high intensity job, or, you know, in between that I was like trying to get published, you know, all of these things. It was very busy. And then suddenly it opened up and I was like, ooh, what do I do with my time? And so I realized, you know, I had the ability to experiment, and I just wanted to write something different, as well as something very different. And I'd been thinking, and I'd been reading a whole bunch of stuff that featured immortals. Right. And, you know, I enjoyed a lot of those books, but I kept thinking that these immortals acted too human. Like, I thought, wouldn't you be more inhuman if you'd lived 10,000 years and you'd seen all these humans come and go? Mm-hmm. Like, and in the book, you know, Raphael is like, well, they're fireflies. They burn bright for a second and then they're gone. So you don't really, I mean, do you pay that much attention to insects around you? You probably don't, you know, they're just there and then they're gone. Right. So that's kind of how it started. I just had this idea, but when I sat down to write, I just saw this woman in an alley in New York, and she was hunting a vampire, but she wasn't a normal kind of vampire hunter. She wasn't going to kill him. She was going to take him back to an angel. And then I was like, what is going on? And I just went with it. And that's how it begins. That's how a lot of my stuff begins. I have an idea that's been playing in my head for a long time. And then I sit down to write, and what comes out is what comes out.
Well, I had a colleague who said, if you want to see some of the best world building, you should read Nalini Singh. And I said, well, all right, I can take that piece of advice. And I started with Angel's Blood, and I was like, not sure I like this guy. Because when we first meet Raphael, not so nice.
Nope.
But it's so, you have such a knack for pulling the reader in and saying, just wait. And the whole series is so compelling in the, you know, as you say, the pattern of an immortal thinking versus mortal thinking. And in some ways you do that a little bit in Slave to Sensation as well, with you have the Sai who have these gifts, and they sort of look down their noses at people who don't have the gifts. And so how do you begin to weave in that each of these people have their value and I love the way you've taken the series, and I like many readers, I'm eagerly awaiting the next one. But with the Guild Hunters, you've now sort of concluded one arc and you're on to the next. And with Archangel's Son is kind of following up and coming into a new sort of, where are we going from here? So what's next with the Archangels and the Guild Hunters?
So it's not quite the end of an arc. I don't want to spoil anything, but I know it feels like it. But this series, I never, like with the Side Changing series, you know, there's season 1 and now we're into season 2. Right. But with Guild Hunter series, I've always seen it as a single contained season. And right. So there are certain more things that need to happen in this world, and then it will be time to depart. And I will cry like a baby, but
so will the rest of us.
But when it's time to go, it's time to go. But the series is just structured slightly differently. So as you mentioned, you know, we've got Elena and Raphael, who are like the central core part of the series. It begins with them, and I've said it will end with them. So they will bookend the series, whatever happens. But it's always had those other characters' books in between.
Right.
So it's unusual for even either a paranormal romance series or an urban fantasy series. It's unusual in that it has those books by different characters in between. And so we're going to get a few more characters' stories, but we are going to circle back to Elena and Raphael as well, because it's not quite done. Because in Archangel's War, the previous book, obviously not a spoiler because war,
yes,
there was this massive shift in the world, and I like exploring what happens afterward. That's part of why I like writing series, because I like seeing, okay, you have this big event, but then I want to know what happens next. You know,
yes.
what happens in the aftermath. I find that just as interesting. So yeah, there are a few things happening. It will all tie back in with previous events in the series. It's going to be not spoilery, but yeah, like very often I do think, okay, so I might do like true spin-off books at some point, for example, of other members of the cadre, the other archangels who we've got to come to know, but maybe who aren't as massive a part of the world.
Right.
But I think if that happens, it would be probably really spun off, you know what I mean? Like I would finish the series and then do spin-off books. With Titus and Shireen, the book that just came out, even though he's an archangel, I felt it tied into the main storyline because of what's happening in Africa. That little piece of story needed to be told, because even though it's in Elena Raphael are the core of the series, it's not centered only on that part of the world, because it's such a big story about, and
it's a global, you've created a global problem that has to be solved.
So it's that's the right way to put it. So we needed to leave and go to another part of the world to see how they were dealing with the situation there. And it so happened that these two characters were just like in my head, and I was like, okay, guess we're doing this. So I did it. So it is a somewhat unusually structured series. And I'm lucky that my editor let me do it, and my readers are coming along.
So, we're along for the ride. We sure are.
So yeah, just keep, please stick with me. More adventures to come.
Well, those are your two major series that you're probably most well known for. But one of the other series that I particularly like are the contemporaries that you've continued to write, novel-length contemporaries, in both the Rock Kiss series and the Rock Hard series. Now, the Rock Kiss series is rock and roll. It's a band, and we follow the members of the band through 4 novels and a novella.
Yes.
And they're all delightful in their own way, and we get to see sort of the ones that have messed up along the journey and then kind of straighten themselves out. And so what was your inspiration for having a rock band be part of your worlds?
I just wanted to do it. I mean, I wish I had a better answer.
No, that's a perfect answer. I just wanted to.
I think, so I can't quite remember when that book came out, the first contemporary. I think sometime 2014, maybe, I want to say. But so by that time, I had been writing paranormals and sort of urban fantasy adjacent stuff for 5-6 years, and not writing any contemporaries. And I think I just felt I'd like to do a little bit of contemporary again. And I'm not a good category writer. I mean, it wasn't the publisher's fault. They didn't acquire that much from me, but just didn't quite work because, but I thought, I'll see if I want to write full length. And I actually wrote Rock Addiction, the first book, just by myself. Like I didn't tell my agent or anyone. I didn't announce it to readers, anything like that. I just wrote it to see how it would go, because I think you probably find this too, but like when you're a writer for a long time, when it's a career, I think it's really important to stretch as a writer and just try different things and just be open to ideas. And so I'm constantly doing this. All my friends know I call them my player projects. And so I always have something on the back burner that I'm fiddling with. And it just so happened that it was this picture, I think, of, I've just remembered, it's this picture that particularly set up this character was of a man with a lip ring. And he was just I was like, whoa, okay, I could do something with that. And so in Rock Addiction, Fox, the hero, he has a lip ring.
Yes.
And so it all sort of sparked that. And I just, I was like, yeah, why not? I haven't written about rock bands, but I like music. I can watch, rock documentaries. And,
Sure.
and in the end, it's stories about people.
Yes.
And for me, it's like building another world. So it didn't feel that different from writing a paranormal or an urban fantasy and building that alternate reality, because I had to build a rock star world that's completely different from, a life in suburban New Zealand kind of thing. So yeah, so it was fun. It was fun to do that research. At one point, I was actually in Los Angeles, and my agent drove me all around the areas that I wanted to set things in. So that was really cool. I got to sort of just see the actual locations, which is not always possible.
Right.
And I got to do research on like rockstar lives and all kinds of things, and the things that sometimes shadow those lives, like addiction and fans and stalking and all this stuff that happens. So yeah, it was just fun, and it was also fun to do. So I write both the Guild Hunter series and the Side Changing series, as you mentioned, are quite involved. They're connected. It's big overarching storylines. So it was nice to write more contained romances as well.
Right.
So yeah, just something different for my brain. I liked it, and so that the Rock Kiss series is finished because it was, it's a contained series. It's 4 books and a novella. Yeah,
but you did connect it. You did connect it to your rugby series. Now, are you a big rugby fan? Are you a big rugby fan?
I can't seem to stop. No, that was my accident. So originally it was just going to be the rock stars, and then in the first book, her best friend, started having this thing with the boss, and I was just like, well, I guess I'm writing this book. And and then he had brothers, so then I was like, well, I can't just not write about the brothers. So that's where the Hard Play series came from, like the brothers of that hero in the book. But each of the books stands alone. So, if anyone's interested in picking them up, just pick up anyone, you'll be fine.
And they're a great deal of fun. And whether you know anything about rugby or not, they're deliciously fun. I actually happen to know something about rugby because my husband played rugby in college, and I actually liked it before I ever met him. So I was like, oh my goodness, it's rugby. How fun.
So like, if you don't know this about New Zealand, rugby is like a religion. Yeah. It's like everybody knows about rugby. I know all the rules of rugby. I've played rugby, not the full tackle rugby. We play touch rugby. So pretty much almost anyone who has grown up in New Zealand, gone to school, just has existed in New Zealand, will have played rugby at some point, or has watched a few rugby games. So I used to be quite into it. It's because my dad loves sports and he loves rugby. So I would just go and sit with him on the weekend when he's watching his rugby games, and I would just get so intense into it. I have the best story. I remember my mom and I. So I was born in Fiji. So I'm of Indian descent, but my ancestors have been Fiji for a while. So my mom always wanted to go to India, to see where our ancestors long ago kind of came from, and just because we were interested to go. So we were over there, me and my mom, and we were on this bus in India, and my sister's texting me the results of the World Cup game from New Zealand because we couldn't get it. And so I'm telling Mom as my sister's texting me, and then two guys sitting next to us on the bus. They were from Australia. They're like, have you got the results of the game? Can you tell us what's going on? So there's four of us, Australians and New Zealanders, sitting there trying to just really excited about these texts that are coming through about the rugby game. So the rugby is in the blood here. And it's fun to write about it for me.
Oh gosh, yes. What's not to love about a bunch of rugby players, really? I mean, and the latest one in that just came out too. That would be that's Love Heart, right? That's the latest one, and that came out in August, I guess. June, July, August, something like that.
Earlier, I think. Oh, I've forgotten. It's all blurred together. March, maybe.
Well, it was earlier this year.
May. I think it was May. I think you're both right. Yes, it was earlier this year.
And now, but that still doesn't wrap up the series, right?
Yeah, there's one more brother left, the baby brother. So he is the baby of the family, even though he's not, he's an adult, obviously, now. Right. But he will always be the baby of the family because he's got four brothers. So, and that's going to be fun. I think everyone's probably guessed who the heroine is going to be because they've had some interactions throughout the series that they basically have grown up together since they were teenagers. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm excited to write that.
Oh, that'll be so much fun. It was, I loved, I'm the youngest of four, so all the family dynamics are fun because you're like, yeah, I know how that goes. And just the way that you've played the family dynamics, both family of origin, family of choice, and the way you've brought, like for instance, Raj's book, the way you brought him in as a family member through rugby, that they're all one big family and they care for each other and they look out after each other. And that's always a wonderful thing, both in your series and also in romance in general, I think, is that it's an inclusive sort of a space. And that's always wonderful.
So. Yeah, I think my favorite series are the ones with the big families, and not, like you said, not just families by DNA, but families by choice. The families we make along the way in life, and all those kind of families. But that's what I found. My absolute favorite series are the ones with those massive families where you just get to follow people all through the books and see those connections. I found those friendship bonds and the non-romantic family bonds just as important, both in writing and in reading. Because I think it just makes it feel so much richer. It's in terms of characterization and the world. And I think that's why I've been drawn towards both romance and science fiction and fantasy, because quite often science fiction and fantasy have those big worlds as well. Like one of my all-time favorite series is the Liarden series by Leon Miller. And, Clan Corval is based, it's this massive family.
Sprawling family, yes.
Yeah, it's sprawling and they're just getting into trouble all over the place, and they're having romances, they're having adventures, and I just love it. It doesn't matter whose book it is or whose novella it is. I just love jumping in and seeing the family again.
Yeah. And I think that's the way fans of yours feel too, when you jump into Love Heart and you get to touch base with all the family members. And you did that in the first book with the Trinity Accord, where you that book was kind of, it seemed at least to be sort of the pivot point to the Trinity, the new Trinity arc was, we sort of touched base with all the different people and sort of saw where everybody was at. And that was very cool. To see where that was going and how it was going for people. And because you, over, 15 books, they become family for the reader as well. So it's always really fun. Now you took a complete departure this year and went for a non-paranormal, non-romance mystery book. So let's talk a little bit about that. Obviously it was an idea that popped in your head and started working on you. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I was going to make a joke about this, 7-year itch. It seems I get an itch every few years to do something different. So like if you track my career, it's like, then I wrote The Guilt Hunters. Oh, and then I wrote some contemporaries, and now I'm writing a mystery. So it was a mix of things. So I live in New Zealand, which is, you know, it's fabulous, it's beautiful, and I read a lot of mystery. So I've always, like I said, voracious reader, read quite eclectically, and I was reading a lot of Nordic noir mysteries as well. And I remember this conversation I was having with my writer friends here, and we were like, how come we're all reading mysteries set in Iceland, which has something like one murder a year? Like, it's ridiculous. They have
Yes.
something. And what, I mean, New Zealand's the same. It's in the middle of nowhere. Nobody really knows much about us. We have all the, you know, like the geography,
Right.
very similar. How come New Zealand noir is not a big thing? We should make it a big thing. It was like a joke, you know, we're just a bunch of romance writers, and you know, are just sitting around chatting. And but I'd actually had an idea for a mystery, and that just kind of was like, it's a little impetus to add to my idea. And then and I'd also been traveling to the west coast of New Zealand, South Island, which is beautiful. It is so beautiful, but it's also really dangerous in terms of like people sometimes don't take it seriously. So they're like, oh, it's a nice sunny day, I'll go for a bushwalk. Except the weather can change so suddenly, and that beautiful sunny day can turn into snow and sleet. And there's constantly, you know, people getting lost in the mountains or going in unprepared, you know, just all those kind of things just added together in my head. And there was this one particular image I remember seeing, which I've spoken about before. I was on a bus. It was an intercity bus. So it basically goes city to city, but it's quite rural in that area. It's very sort of rugged. And so it's beautiful scenery, and quite like taking the bus there, you know, because I can just sit and look out the window. And saw this girl jump off, and she had a backpack on, obviously a hiker. She jumped off at a trailhead, and she just disappeared into this trailhead. And it was like this arrowing, you know, when you see the darkness, and she was just gone. And I just was watching after, and I was like, she just walked off alone into the darkness, basically. And it just clicked something in my brain.
I was going to say, for a writer, that's just like, oh where did she go?
What's happening? Yeah, so all those things came together, and I just started writing. And again, it was one of my play projects. So again, I didn't tell anyone I was doing it, because for me, I like, when I do something new, I want to do it without any kind of pressure. I didn't want a book deal where I knew I had to hand it in at a certain time. I didn't want to tell readers, because I didn't want to get their hopes up in case it didn't work. Or I decided I didn't actually want to finish, you know, something like that. Right. I just wanted that total sort of aloneness in creating, just in my own little bubble, and seeing how it worked, because sometimes it's like, I have to figure out if I can do it, because it is a big change. So I had to work out, is this something that I can do? Or is it a case of, I have a bright flash of an idea, but when I try and put it together, there's no meat to it.
Right.
So yeah, I just did it, and I had a full-length book, which was actually a really good thing when I did give it to my agent, and then we did go out on submission, because there were no expectations of what a book from Nalini Singh that's a mystery or a thriller would be. I think everybody automatically would have thought romantic suspense, and this isn't romantic suspense. And because I had the whole book, people could just read it and see what it was, as opposed to expecting something I might not deliver. Yeah.
Right. Well, obviously you liked it well enough, though, that you then have the second one coming.
Yes.
And it's going to be out in the spring, right?
February. Is that spring for you guys? It's end of winter.
Well, it's winter for us still, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a series. It is another standalone. It's another mystery set in New Zealand. So I'm flying the flag for New Zealand noir. Everybody, we're just as creepy as Iceland in mystery terms. Yeah, so this one's called Quiet in Her Bones. And again, it's something very different in this book. So it's a woman who disappeared 10 years ago, and everybody thought she vanished with $250,000. And they're like, well, she took off. She's living the high life on some beach somewhere. And even though it's set in Auckland, where I live, which is a big city, there's a massive forest on our border. It's the Waitakere Regional National Park. It's huge. It's sprawling. It's I remember listening to a talk by a forensic scientist who came to a writers group, and she was talking about how many bodies they find buried in that kind of area, because really, if you disappear someone in there, it's going to be very difficult to find them. I mean, that's the thinking anyway. And so, yeah, again, that sort of sparked things in my head. And so it's set in a community, or like in a very small enclave of the Waitakere Ranges Regional Park. So the forest is alive in the story, and it's all around them, and it's like this looming presence. And they find this woman who disappeared. They find her car buried in the bush. We call it the bush here.
Yeah.
And she's wearing, her bones, her remains are wearing the clothes from the night 10 years ago that she apparently left with $250,000. So then it's like, well, she didn't leave at all. The tagline for the book is, what is it? Not even the dead get to leave this cul-de-sac. So it's super creepy. Yeah, I love it. I think it's fantastic, but obviously I have to say that because I wrote it. I hope everyone else likes it too. My mom said it was really good, so that's the that's the best recommendation I can give you.
Because most of the time your mom will be like, not so sure. Harsh critics sometimes, your mama's. So has it been sometimes when you do something, as Monty Python would say, completely different, it's a great shift for your brain, because you then can shift back to your urban fantasy or your, paranormals and things like that with a fresh perspective. Has that done that for you, or has it just been sort of not such a big mental shift?
It's not so much a mental shift, but I think I just like having those breaks, doing something different in between. Mm-hmm. And then I go back to my other work more refreshed. Yeah, so I don't think it's been a mental shift in that way, because they are so very different. There's no real crossover. Well, there is a little bit actually, because I do write mysteries within my urban fantasies and paranormals as well. Yeah. So that part of it is actually not that big of a change for me. But I just like that little break in between, doing something different. And then I come back to, so now, I'm itching to write, the next Guild Hunter book, for example, because I'm currently finishing off the next Changeling book. And then
what is the title of that one? What's the title of the next Changeling?
Last Guard, yeah. So that comes out, I think, in July next year. So,
I probably already have it pre-ordered, so.
That's what I like to hear. But yeah, for me, it's just, it's not so much a mental shift, I suppose, as just opposed to a break. Then I can come back, and I'm excited to be back into the world that I've been missing for the past few months as I work on something else. And yeah, so it's a nice cycle. Yeah.
Right. So I take it from that you will continue to write the mysteries, because they give you that break and they're fascinating. And hey, you're creating New Zealand noir. So.
I can't say I'm creating it. There are lots of other New Zealand noir books. I just think it hasn't taken off the same way as Scandinavian noir, and I just find that fascinating because, like I said, it's these countries that are just big in crime. It's like they actually have very little crime. It's I find that just really interesting.
Having been to Iceland, I'm like, Iceland noir. Wow, I may have to check that out.
But
there's not much that's kind of noir about Iceland.
Well, according to the mysteries, there's a really good one on not a book, but a TV series that's based in Iceland, and it's on Netflix, and so somebody will put it in the comments. But yes, it's very noir. It's very noir. It's got the noir edge to it. Yeah, I will write more mysteries. I think I just enjoy it. It's something different. Again, flexing another part of those writing muscles. Right. And, you know, it just, having fun with it.
That's great. That's great. So what advice would you give for writers who are starting out, whether that's in romance or mystery? What are some of the best pieces of advice you got as a starting writer, or that you would give now that you've been doing it for a while?
So one of the best pieces of advice I got maybe is not as relevant now, but it would be relevant to those of you who are submitting to traditional publishers, and which is that don't just submit to one publisher and then just sit there and wait, because if they reject you, it's going to just devastate you. It's much better to have multiple submissions out there, because then if one gets rejected, you still got the chance to, you've got hope. So, right. And then always, of course, keep writing. Don't sit there and wait. The other thing, and what I would say now that I've been doing this, for a while, is to focus on the writing first. I think, especially now, because there is so much information available online, it's so easy to get sucked into discussions of marketing and who's going to buy my book, etc., etc., etc. But you know what? None of that matters unless you have the book in the first place. Right. So the writing must come first. And even when say you have a book out, again, don't get sucked into the whole marketing thing, because one book is one book. You're building a career. And to build a career, you have to write. So the writing must come first before any of that. So that's my first piece of advice. My second piece is that I think you need to have some privacy for your writing. And what I mean by that is, yes, share your work. And I know it's a lot of people share as they write. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing for a starting writer. I'm not talking about someone who is obviously experienced, because I think when you're a starting writer, you're developing your voice, and it's important to develop it yourself without input from all these other voices telling you, oh, you should fix this, or you should, this would be better, because I think that influences too much what your voice is. And so that voice, that personal writing voice, is not as strong. I think part of my strength as a writer is that I wrote alone for a long time before anyone ever saw my work. That by the time I did get editorial suggestions, I was actually quite confident in my voice as a writer. And so I was able to talk to editors and say, hey, totally see your point, but this is the reason why I made this choice for this character. Can we work with this, And sometimes they would be like, oh, we see that, but this is why we made this, the suggestion. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I see it. Because I'd been writing long enough and I developed my voice strongly enough that I can both take on board changes and, but I don't take on board everything anyone tells me. And I think that's the danger if you're sharing when you're really new as a writer. The temptation is to take all the advice and just add it all in and think it's all good. But what you're doing is diluting your own identity as a writer. So I would say, don't share. Don't be really quick to share. It's okay to just write for yourself for a while until you're confident that you know who you are as a writer before you start asking for lots of input on your work.
Oh, couldn't agree more, because I almost stopped writing for that very reason. Too much input, and it became not my story. So yeah. And then you're like, well, but do I even have a reason to do this? Because too much input and it becomes not your story. So could not agree more. So obviously we've talked a little bit about some of the things you have forthcoming. Any other things coming out in 2021 that we can eagerly anticipate?
At this stage, it is Quiet on Her Bones, the thriller in February. And then in July will be Last Guard, the next side-changing book. And if you're waiting for the paperback release of Alpha Night, the most recent side-changing book, it is in January in North America and February in the UK and the Commonwealth. And don't ask me why, the dates are different. There's two different publishers and they decide. Yeah, so that's what's happening next year. I'll, after I hand in this book that I'm working in now, I'll take a break and then I'll sit down and do my scheduling for my writing schedule for next year. And so I might be able to then tell when Danny's book for the contemporaries will be coming out, because it's when I write it, and then, comes out later after I write it. So I'm hoping to have that out in 2021 as well. So no promises yet, but fingers crossed, because I've had the opening scene for that book in my head for so long, and I just need to get it out. So signs are good.
Yay. Well, thank you so very much for being with us. Obviously, you all can find Nalini Singh at nalinisingh.com. And since we're still in a situation where we can't go out and about, we won't have a lot of appearance schedules, although New Zealand has obviously done a lot better with that than anywhere in the United States has. But we will, I'm sure, once we get back to normal, see you out and about at conferences and online as well. And she does have on her website a schedule of appearances virtually as well. And again, thank you so much for being with us, Nalini, and have a great rest of your year.
Well, the day's starting for me. So yeah, I'm ready to write. I hope you have a great day too. This was really fun.